In Little Rock today, Paula Jones delayed filing her sexual harassment suit against President Clinton. Her lawyers now say she intends to file that lawsuit tomorrow morning. The White House says her charges are false and politically motivated. Joining us tonight are Reed Irvine, chairman of the conservative media watchdog group Accuracy in Media, which has supported Jones since she first made allegations against Clinton in February. Also joining us is Democratic Congressman Bill Richardson of New Mexico, a strong Clinton ally on Capitol Hill. Reed, quote from this brilliant lawyer of Paula Jones, quote, "My case is weak, but I needed the client and she needed the money." Ferguson, the officer you talk about, changed his story 5 times. Quote, when asked directly, did you take this woman up to the room? I am not confirming that I took anybody to the room. I don't want to get my family involved in this. All we've got is one woman who has asked for dough for her and her husband, who went down, and her witnesses who are testifying on her behalf are her mama, her sister, and her fiance, now husband. Now, would you say that's enough of a case to expose the President of the United States to this kind of ridicule? I mean, I think it's obscene. I don't think any news organization ought to be following the story after, of course, we do it tonight.
Let me give you another witness. The President says he doesn't remember ever meeting her.
Right.
Paula has said, and it has been confirmed by Trooper Larry Patterson, that she was in the rotunda of the Arkansas Capitol building one day. Clinton spotted her across. He came over, he grabbed her, put his arm around her, and said to Larry Patterson, don't we make a beautiful couple, Beauty and the Beast? And Larry Patterson confirmed that on our TV show, The Other Side of the Story.
Is Larry Patterson not the trooper that's also under investigation for fraud and insurance? I think that is him. Well, wait a second. Wait, let me follow up one more thing. One thing Bill Richardson said here, this is true though, Reed, isn't it? Every right-wing group in America loves this story because they're out there, they raise a lot of money on it. They're out there because the one thing is true. Bill Clinton is kicking your guys' butts, and you can't touch anything else. You bring this sleaze in. But please, think about it. It's the President of the United States. I wouldn't even do this to Ronald Reagan.
All right, but if it was done, if something like this truly occurred, it is a stinking outrage, and this woman says it did. Let me ask you, Bill Richardson, why not? If it's all false and the right-wingers are just making money off this, what is wrong with taking this into court? Here's a 23-year-old woman who says she was abused by the governor of Arkansas. Let it go into court. Let her take her story in. Put those troopers under oath for a change. Let her mama and her friends and everyone else go under oath. Put the President of the United States under oath in a deposition. And if he calls it lies and it's proven to be lies, I'll get right on this thing and say, that's an outrage what was done to him.
Should he do that for every woman that comes up and claims sexual harassment?
No, we couldn't. That would take 100 shows.
People to do it.
That would take 100 shows, as you know, Bob. But this case is dead serious. It has to do not with an adulterous affair or some relationship. It has to do with a power relationship and a very ugly, grievous case of sexual harassment, far worse than any that are currently alleged against Senator Bob Packwood, who is before the Ethics Committee.
But, Pat, look, what we have here is, if it isn't Jennifer Flowers, it's these state troopers. Now we have a case of a woman making an allegation. It's going to go to the courts. The President's hired a lawyer. But he is absolutely defenseless in this situation.
I agree.
With all of these people throwing these baseless charges. Here we have a known case.
Are they all
Pat,
baseless?
Every single political right-wing organization is trying to make money out of this. They're trying to prove that the President has no moral fiber because they can't get him on the issues. They're attacking him unfairly personally.
Reed Irvine, you are, I don't agree with you politically, but you are a patriot. You fought for your country. I do believe that you believe the presidency is an important institution here. Don't you think if this continues to go on, one after another, that Clinton, who is defenseless, you're exactly right, there's no solid evidence here. Here's a president of the United States having to respond to this garbage. It hurts the presidency. It hurts the presidency. Forget Clinton.
What you're saying is, let's disregard the facts because it's President Clinton. You didn't say that when they came out with the October surprise charges and had an investigation of those absurd stories about the Bush and the Reagan campaign.
I said it on Clarence Thomas.
You didn't do it about Reagan on Iran-Contra, etc. Now let me point out something. Bill has kept saying that the right-wing organizations are all making money on this. Accuracy in Media spent $30,000 to put ads in the newspapers. We asked for people to contribute to help pay for the ads. I think we've taken in about $1,000, so we're down about $29,000, Bob.
That'll make it up after the show.
Yeah, I hope so. But we haven't even told what happened in this case. Let me give you a comparative example. If Admiral Kelso, Frank Kelso, at that tailhook convention, had said to his uniformed aide, look, there's a pretty little naval, no, let's say an enlisted woman over there, Get her for me and bring her up to my hotel room. The aide approaches her. The admiral wants to see you upstairs. She goes up. The admiral starts putting the pressure on her. He drops his pants. He exposes himself and says, "Kiss it. Kiss it." Do you think that the Senate last 10 days ago would have been debating whether or not he'd get 2 stars or 4? They've been debating how long he should serve.
Reed, I'm going to debate whether we can pick Buchanan up off the floor. Go ahead.
Bill Richardson, thanks very much for joining us. Reed Irvine, Brother Beckel and I will be back here discussing this issue in a moment. Bob, let me tell you, you make a very valid point when you say that this is really demeaning to the presidency itself. It is sickening, it is grisly, but President Clinton's character level is falling down with the American people, and it's not simply the fault of the conservatives, a lot right-wingers, some of whom are exploiting this. The guy's got problems himself, Bob, and you know it.
Well, listen, Pat, the problem I've got is every one of these things that comes out here, whether it's the troopers or Paula, whatever her name was, and this woman now, it's always behind them are right-wing zealots who don't like Bill Clinton. Now, listen, the truth of the matter is that unless you get some people out there with more credibility, these allegations aren't going to hunt. And secondly, when does the President of the United States stop having to answer these things? If they don't get this woman to do it, they can go out and find another who'll say, for 15 minutes of glory, I did something with the President of the United States.
Bob, this case is totally different than the other women. This is a clear-cut, if true and if proven, a clear-cut case of terrible abuse of a state employee and a 23-year-old gal, and it was wrong if true, and he ought to be held accountable if true.
The only I can say is I'm glad the NRA lost today. From the left, I'm Bob Beckel. Good night for Crossfire.
From the right, Pat Buchanan. Join us tomorrow night for another edition of Crossfire.
White House correspondent Wolf Blitzer is standing by with more on this. Wolf.
Natalie, the president's personal lawyer, Robert Bennett, is harshly denying the Paula Jones sexual harassment allegations. This is tabloid trash with a legal caption on it, he said in a statement. This is about money, book contracts, and television shows. The president adamantly denies that this incident occurred, and this case will be vigorously contested. Bennett was at the White House this morning meeting with senior officials. He will try to undermine Jones's credibility by pointing out that her allegations were initially made in February at a news conference here in Washington sponsored by the Conservative Political Action Committee, and she was joined by Cliff Jackson, one of the president's most bitter political enemies. Jones's older sister, meanwhile, has told a Little Rock television station that her sister, Paula Jones, is in it for the money. But in Little Rock, one of Jones's attorneys read a statement on her behalf explaining the lawsuit.
This case is not about money. This case is about character and integrity. This case is about the powerful taking advantage of the weak. This case is about my name and my reputation in the eyes of my family, my young son, and my community. This case is about justice.
Last night on Larry King Live, First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton was asked about the case, but she clearly did not want to speak about it.
I have nothing to add to what's already been said by the White House.
Are you happy with the choice of Bob Bennett?
I'm getting to know him. He seems like a very fine man.
Does it upset you at all?
Mm-mm.
Doesn't bother you?
Mm-mm.
There has been no reaction from the White House. Officials here are referring all questions to Robert Bennett, who's scheduled to hold a news conference at this hour. Natalie?
Well, Wolf, it sounds like Bennett is striking a very stern tone at this moment. Any idea, or do you get a sense of the level of concern around the White House regarding this?
Well, clearly it's obviously something that they don't like. It's a headache. There's no doubt that they would have preferred that Paula Jones not go forward with the lawsuit. It will generate a lot of media attention, and as a result, they're not happy about it. But they think that the legal merits of her case are very weak, and Bennett, at his news conference and in subsequent days and weeks, will try to demolish all of her legal challenges. There's no doubt that this is unprecedented. that the filing a suit against the president, a sitting president, is something the courts will have to decide whether that is legally applicable given the nature of the president's obligations to the country, whether he has some sort of executive privilege. But that will be handled by the courts. For now, it's a political headache, a political problem for the president.
Okay, Wolf Blitzer at the White House. Thanks, Bobby.
An unprecedented lawsuit was filed today against the President of the United States. Paula Jones, a former Arkansas state employee, is suing Bill Clinton for sexual harassment. The incident in question goes back to 1991 when Clinton was state governor. Lawyer Joseph Camarata read a statement from Jones to reporters in Little Rock today.
This case is not about money. This case is about character and integrity. This case is about the powerful taking advantage of the weak. This case is about my name and my reputation in the eyes of my family, my young son, and my community. This case is about justice. I did not bring these events to the public's attention, nor did I seek the limelight. The events giving rise to the filing of this suit occurred nearly 3 years ago. Since that time, my husband and I have tried to deal with the impact of those events in our own private way. It was only after Danny Ferguson, an Arkansas state trooper, publicly reported his version of the occurrence in January of this year that I decided to come forward with the truth. And only after Mr. Clinton and his staff denied these events had ever happened and called me pathetic and in effect a liar did I decide to seek legal relief for the wrong done to me by Mr. Clinton and Trooper Ferguson. I did so for the sole reason of clearing my name. I did not seek publicity in this matter. I do not seek publicity in this matter. I want a jury of ordinary citizens in Arkansas to look at the facts in this case and decide who is telling the truth. Since I know what actually happened in that hotel room and what happened in the months following, I am confident my reputation will be restored through this process.
Well, for Clinton, this is the latest in a series of problems that have followed him from the Arkansas governor's mansion to the White House. He's been accused of inappropriate behavior by Arkansas state troopers, and he's still fighting allegations of financial improprieties in the Whitewater real estate scandal. Is the president's agenda being held hostage by his days in Little Rock? Gene Gibbons is the White House correspondent for Reuters News Service in Washington. Gene, first of all, let's deal with the story itself today. How big is it?
Well, Brian, immediately after Paula Jones' lawyer filed the lawsuit in Little Rock, Clinton's lawyer, Robert Bennett, issued a statement saying that the president flatly denies the incident described ever happened, will contest it vigorously, and Bennett went on to call what Ms. Jones had to say tabloid trash.
Now, is the White House press corps, how is its reaction to this reaction from the White House administration?
Well, this is the first time in anyone's memory that a U.S. president has been sued for actions that occurred before he became president. So there's interest in it just from that historic standpoint. It's an issue that is distracting attention from the president's agenda. It focuses on the character issue at a time when Mr. Clinton would prefer to focus on issues like health care reform.
Certainly. I want to get to that a bit later, but first of all, I'm wondering if you are a little surprised by the quick response from the White House.
Not at all. I think they see this as potentially a serious political problem. It adds to the overall mass of charge and countercharge swirling about in the Watergate, Whitewater affair that you mentioned. And it also goes to an important part of Mr. Clinton's constituency. Sexual harassment is a very serious charge for many of the women who supported Clinton over George Bush in the 1992 campaign.
Mm-hmm. Now, are these complaints of sexual misconduct plus this Whitewater affair, are they getting in the way of the president's ability to run the country?
I think there's no question that they are, Brian. Yesterday was a good example, or this whole affair, the Jones thing, coupled with a new subpoena that was issued yesterday in the Whitewater affair. There was a vote in the House of Representatives on Thursday in which a ban on assault weapons was passed by a 2-vote margin. That was a big victory for President Clinton. It was the first time that the National Rifle Association, the gun lobby, has been beaten in the House on an issue like that. And yet he had to share the spotlight with the run-up to the Jones affair and a broad new subpoena issued by the Whitewater special prosecutor.
Gene, I'm wondering if there's anything in your mind that suggests that this is more than just coincidence, the timing of these kinds of clashes.
Well, there's no question that there is some political orchestration to all this. Some of the Whitewater charges have been leveled by Cliff Jackson, an Arkansas politician who is a longtime political enemy of Mr. Clinton. In fact, I believe that Jackson had a hand in bringing Paula Jones to the fore. She first leveled these charges, Brian, back in February, and she leveled them at a news conference here in Washington sponsored by the Conservative Political Action Caucus, which, of course, is no friend of the president's.
Right. Now, what about the Republicans getting in on all of these other things that have been tainting his agenda, Clinton's agenda? Is there any kind of retribution being thought of here for some of the things that the Democrats were inflicting on the Republicans, especially with, say, George Bush trying to appoint Robert Bork and Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court?
I think there is an element of payback here. The Republicans remember vividly the attack on Clarence Thompson when he faced confirmation hearings for the Supreme Court before the Senate Judiciary Committee. You and your viewers will recall that Anita Hill came forth at that point and accused Thomas of sexual harassment. There were also charges about Bork's legal views being out of the political mainstream when he faced confirmation for the court, a confirmation proceeding that was not successful in that instance. So the Republicans, I think, have little sympathy for Mr. Clinton. Indeed, are happy to fan some of the flames here. They've been pushing for hearings on the Whitewater affair, and indeed those hearings are supposed to start later this year.
Have any Republicans been seen in the shadows of this whole Paula Jones affair yet?
Well, as I mentioned, she initially went public with the charges that resulted in today's lawsuit at a Conservative Political Action Conference meeting in Washington in February, and that, of course, is a Republican organization.
Can you give us an idea of how Washington is reacting to this whole messy affair?
Well, of course, as I said at the outset, this is very unusual in that it's the first time that a sitting president has been sued for actions that occurred before he was president. It also involves a politically explosive subject, sexual harassment. I spoke this morning, by the way, to former Vice President Dan Quayle and asked him at one point if he felt any sympathy for Mr. Clinton now taking a pounding in the public press the way that Quayle himself did when he was vice president. Quayle said that he does have sympathy for the president having to try to recall events that happened years and years ago, but has no sympathy for the character issues that have resulted in the focus that we're seeing now.
Okay. Gene Gibbons, I'm sorry, we'll have to leave that one there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
And that's our program.
Out of Little Rock, where a former state employee formally filed suit against President Clinton alleging sexual harassment. NBC's Jim Miklaszewski is in Little Rock tonight.
Just beating the statute of limitations, the lawsuit was filed in federal court in Little Rock. Paula Jones avoided the media mob and was a no-show. 2 Virginia lawyers have taken over the case and read a statement on her behalf.
This case is not about money. This case is about character and integrity. This case is about the powerful taking advantage of the weak.
Jones alleges that in 1991, just 5 months before he declared for the presidency, then Governor Clinton lured her to a private room at this Little Rock hotel during a state conference and made unwanted sexual advances.
And he had exposed himself, unzipped him, and he dropped his pants down. He was sitting right beside me on the couch.
Jones is seeking $700,000 in damages. No criminal charges are involved. The lawsuit threw the White House for a loop. Minutes after the filing, top aide George Stephanopoulos rushed to the South Lawn for a quick conference. Later, President Clinton was asked if he denied the charges.
I'm not going to dignify this by commenting on it.
But the president's lawyer, Bob Bennett, denied the incident ever occurred.
This complaint is tabloid trash with a legal caption on it. If it was a serious lawsuit, it would not read like a made-for-TV lawsuit.
Bennett claims the suit is motivated by politics and greed. The case has been a rallying cry for conservatives. Jones first went public with the charge at a conservative-sponsored news conference. And her oldest sister now claims Jones is in it for the money.
She told me that whichever way it went, it smelt money.
But today, through her attorneys, Jones announced that any damages won in the suit would be donated to charity. And though no mention was made of any movie or book deal, she also denied she's out to make money by selling her story. True or not, this lawsuit is a major embarrassment to President Clinton. And if his lawyers can't get this suit dismissed, he may be forced to answer these charges under oath. Jim Miklashevsky, NBC News, Little Rock.
She noted, quote, distinguishing characteristics, unquote, in his genital area. After rebuffing him, she says he asked her to keep quiet, but later she told two friends, including this one, what had occurred, and they've signed sworn affidavits describing her as upset and distraught. Mrs. Jones also contends that she was treated badly at her job, denied merit raises, and arbitrarily transferred as punishment for rejecting Mr. Clinton's advances.
This case is not about money.
Her attorneys from suburban Washington said today that any money awarded to her would be donated to charity.
This case is about character and integrity. This case is about the powerful taking advantage of the weak.
But Daniel Traylor, Ms. Jones' former attorney, did mention money and perhaps a federal job for her to George Cook, a Little Rock businessman and friend of the president.
They were asking for money, plain and simple.
Now, in exchange for money, what did he offer?
That she would not hold the press conference and would not embarrass the president with this bizarre story.
Mrs. Jones' sister, Charlotte Brown, said today that she also always had the impression that money was an important factor.
It smelt money. And that was her exact words. Whichever way it goes, it smelt money.
It seems to be a classic he said, she said impasse. But the sidewalk lawyers and the courthouse crowd are already focusing on Trooper Ferguson as the key player. He was at the hotel, and besides the president and Mrs. Jones, he may be the only one who can shed some light on what did or did not happen on that spring afternoon almost exactly 3 years ago. Jim Wooten, ABC News, Little Rock.
This is Britt Hume at the White House. The president had been told the Paula Jones suit was coming, and his staff warned him this morning after it was filed he would get questions about it. The job of responding was left to Mr. Clinton's newly hired lawyer, the renowned criminal defense attorney Robert Bennett.
We absolutely deny, without any question, that this incident occurred. This president did not engage in any inappropriate or sexual conduct with this woman.
Bennett said the president could not recall ever meeting Paula Jones. He noted she'd appeared on conservative-sponsored events and talk shows. She did appear in this report on Pat Robertson's 700 Club, where she made the same charges that appear in her lawsuit.
I sat down on the far end of the couch, and before I knew it, he got up, and before I knew it, he was sitting down beside me, and he had exposed himself.
This complaint is tabloid trash with a legal caption on it. If it was a serious lawsuit, it would not read like a made-for-TV lawsuit.
This afternoon, the president himself was asked about the suit.
Bob Bennett spoke for me, and I'm going back to work. I'm not going to dignify this by commenting on it.
Despite the White House and lawyer Bennett's disdainful reaction to it, one lawyer experienced in sexual harassment cases said the Jones suit may not be easy to get rid of.
It is a well-pled complaint, and I would assume it's going to survive motions to dismiss, which means that you've got a fairly long discovery and trial process ahead of them.
That, of course, is what worries the White House. Not so much that Paula Jones could actually win this lawsuit, but that she could keep it going long enough to force the president to answer under oath wide-ranging and highly embarrassing personal questions. Britt Hume, ABC News.
Sexual harassment back when he was governor. What's your feeling for how serious a political matter this is for the president?
Well, I'm beginning to think, Jim, that this presidency is a 4-year race between the questions and doubts about this president's character and his savvy political instincts. And this was the character issue come back again. This time, I think it's a little different than just the mere accusations of infidelity, which are familiar and have been discounted by a lot of the voters, because this is a legal issue. This brings the issue of sexual harassment with all of the ramifications, the political echoes it created in the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas debate. And we have the specter here, potentially, of a president actually being deposed on some of these things. So it could create a big issue down the road.
Being deposed meaning having to answer questions, not deposed as president. Right.
No, I'm sorry. That only happens in monarchies.
That's right, that's right, that's right. Elizabeth, how serious is this, or could this be?
I think it's serious in the extent that he really didn't need this now. I think Paul is exactly right. Actually, you had both Clintons this week. You had the thing that he really needed to happen, a major legislative victory that he was very much responsible for, and then a story that re-raises a question.
That's the assault weapons ban.
The assault weapons ban, right. And a story that re-raises the question of his character, whether or not there's validity to this suit. It's almost irrelevant. And he really didn't need that. And at the White House, I mean, they're all acting very cool about it, and the president asked today in a photo op, well, what about the suit? Well, I'm not going to dignify it with a response and all that, but I'm told he's very upset. And you can tell that the aides aren't very happy. I mean, they know that they just don't need reminders. And of course, Jim, it came at a time when they really started to feel that Whitewater was petering out. Yeah. There have been no new charges. There will be hearings in some form, but they really thought maybe they were getting that off the table for some period of time, and then this. And I can remember when Paula Jones first did her press conference at the
That was in February, wasn't it?
February,
yeah.
Conservative Political Action Group here, which makes it a little bit suspect. And the White House jumped on it. Now they've adopted the term bimbo eruptions, and they really thought they'd gotten rid of her. And here she is, back to haunt Mr. Clinton. It's almost like a Greek play.
Yeah. Yes, Paul, yeah.
If there were any doubts that they didn't take this seriously, they were gone when they hired Bob Bennett. I mean, he's the kind of attorney you hire when you're going to fight a political battle.
This was Robert Bennett, probably the best known, most effective defender of people who have been accused, people in public life in Washington who have been accused of things. He represented the Keating, well, he prosecuted the Keating Five. He also represents Dan Rostenkowski, just for the folks who don't know who Robert Bennett is.
Right, yeah. He represents you. You get him as representation when you're not going to just argue the law. You're going to argue the politics. And he knows how to work the press, and so they take it very seriously.
What about this issue? You mentioned it, Paul. You mentioned you mentioned this in your column this morning, in fact, in the Wall Street Journal. This thing with the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas deal, that this really puts the liberals and the Democrats and the feminists in a very interesting situation. But you said in your column that, wait a minute, the conservatives should be careful with that issue, this particular issue now. Why do you feel that way?
Well, I wish they would. I'm afraid they won't be, because what the Anita Hill episode put on, I think, on the agenda in Washington as a political standard is one of personal attack and moral assault, really. You go right to the heart of the individual. You don't argue about your political differences. You go right to the heart of the character of the individual. And a lot of conservatives remember that standard now, and they're itching to get back. And Paula Jones creates the perfect opportunity. So you have an awful lot of people who wore those I Believe Anita buttons who are going to be put on a tough situation here, because they're going to have to look at this lawsuit and say, do I take this one seriously too, even though Bill Clinton has arguably been one of the best presidents for the feminist cause in many, many years.
Yeah. What do you think about that, Elizabeth?
Well, I don't believe much in the politics of retribution or the social man school of governing. I think to say Robert Bork or Anita Hill isn't to say much about the next situation or another situation. I think where this is really dangerous for the president is not just in the character question coming back again, but there's a whole question of Clinton's presidentialness and whether he really brings the dignity to the office that there should be. And sometimes he does and sometimes he doesn't. Now, the suit was brought. It's a really squalid, horrible suit. The whole country is going to be talking about some of its details. It sure doesn't help him in that respect.
Yeah. But at the same time...
Well, Bill Clinton's character is under attack again. As you saw earlier in our news, a former state employee in Arkansas is suing the U.S. president over what she says was sexual harassment, that Clinton made an unwanted advance while he was still the governor of Arkansas. Paula Jones first made these allegations back in February, so this has raised questions about the timing of the legal action and the motivation behind it. Joining us tonight to discuss the impact of this latest allegation against the president is Michael Duffy, White House correspondent for Time magazine, and Reed Irvine, chairman of Accuracy in Media. It's a conservative watchdog group that says reporters have deliberately ignored the allegations against the president. So let me start with you then, Michael Duffy, on this question. Is it just the politics of personal destruction, tabloid trash, or is this a credible case that you guys in the mainstream media ignored?
Well, I think it's probably a little bit of both. There's no question that Paula Jones's filing today for sexual harassment and intent to harm emotionally has some political tinge to it. Clearly, the timing is never good for a president, and there's no question that she has some contacts with members of the right wing of the Republican Party and people who just don't like Bill Clinton. On the other hand, you know, as for the press ignoring it, I think everybody held off until she was ready to file, and until she was going to file, it really wasn't ready to go. Most people weren't ready to go with the story. I think the timing's fine in terms of the press.
All right, Mr. Irvine, what's your view of this? Because there are kind of several options here, and we've heard all the allegations made today that she's a gold digger looking to make some money. There is the position that she could really be a legitimate victim, and as we've just heard from Mr. Duffy, that she might even, in fact, be a pawn for the critics of Clinton.
Well, there are several things that should be said. First of all, I noticed on your newscast this evening, you didn't report that her lawyers had made it clear today that any damages that she might collect over and above the expenses incurred in pursuing the case were going to be donated to charity. And I think that ought to lay to rest once and for all this question that she's doing this for the money. She and her husband have told me that the money was not the object. All they were looking for was to clear her name and her reputation.
But her sister also said that she did make that comment to her that she was in it for the money.
True, but, you know, there's another point. I mean, the press held off on reporting her story, said they had to investigate it thoroughly. I didn't see any evidence on the part of most of the journalists to investigate why the sister said that. Now, Michael Isikoff and his crew from the Washington Post, who investigated the story most thoroughly of all, had interviewed that sister weeks ago, and she did not say that to Michael Isikoff then. Why is she saying it now? Nor was it reported that her younger sister has said that this older sister, Charlotte, is simply lying.
Okay.
That she's been gotten to by the Clinton people.
All right, Michael Duffy, these are just questions. I mean, is everybody just so blasé about allegations against Bill Clinton that they don't bother to even follow them up anymore?
Well, I mean, covering this Jones family is a little bit like covering the Michael Jackson family. Everyone seems to hate everyone in this family, and I think there's a limit to what most reporters really have time to worry about. Until the suit was filed, we didn't really have a lot of concern about what the intricacies of the family feud might have been. Now that may be a factor, and I'm sure that both the president's lawyer, Robert Bennett, and Mr. Jones' lawyers are going to get to the bottom of that one, and that'll be part of this if the case isn't dismissed and it actually goes to discovery, which is the next stage. You know, Reed's right. Paula has vowed to give her proceeds from the legal proceedings to charity, but that's really not where the money is in this case. The money is in the books and the movies and the TV rights and the interviews and the various, you know, talk shows and tabloid TV programs she can sell the story to, and she'll have to do something of that just to pay for her legal fees. So it's nice that she's donating some of this to charity, but I think we ought to be a little suspect about some of the other money.
But what about the timing issue itself? Why is there this delay between February and May?
Well, the statute of limitations on her suit really runs out on Sunday, so she had to file it today or she wouldn't have been able to file it. She came to Washington in February to announce that she was filing, but most news organizations don't do a lot with, you know, intentions to file. They wait till the filing comes.
But Michael, please. She gave a press conference on February 11th, and it got no coverage in the Washington Post the next day. It got 250 words in the New York Times. Most of the paper, nothing on television except 3 sentences on ABC News. When Anita Hill gave her press conference, first press conference, it was 3 pages in the New York Times, 2 pages in the Washington Post, covered live on all the networks. And this young lady has 5 times as much evidence to support her claim as Anita Hill ever had, and the charges she made are much more serious. And the focus on her, on Paula, is all about what her motivations might be. That was
well, in fairness, Mr. Irvine, that was certainly raised in the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas affair as well.
Only because David Brock of the American Spectator made an investigation and found that she had indeed been propelled into her actions by radical feminist groups.
Okay, so what are you saying, Mr. Irvine, that you think that the press, the mainstream press, hasn't done this story because they all are trying to protect Bill Clinton? Is that what you're saying?
That was laid out by Mickey Cowes, a liberal correspondent for the liberal magazine, The New Republic, who said the reporters caucused after the news conference to see how they were going to handle it. And
Mickey
they agreed
hates Clinton, though.
Well, and a lot of reporters caucused, and he said they felt that Clinton was the best president we'd had in a long time. And he said the dirty little secret is that we journalists are patriots too, and we didn't want to hurt the president.
Mr. Duffy.
Well, I guess if Reedy Irvine thinks we're too much in the pocket of the White House...
That was Mickey Cowes, not me.
Even if Mickey Cowes thinks it, and if Hillary Rodham Clinton thinks we're the lapdog of the right wing, which is what she said this week...
And if the public thinks you're all reporting stuff that belongs in the tabloids anyway...
Yeah, well, we're probably doing our job.
All right, well, let's take a look at the implications of this, and of course, this may end up in court, and the details will be discussed then. Where does this stand, Mike, and where does it put the president? Lots of allegations about his character, Whitewater, now this. What happens?
This is horrible. I mean, this is a bad, bad scene for the president. He once again, can't seem to get past his past. And it's never good to have any kind of suit filed, but this one is possibly the worst kind. It goes to an issue that has been raised for years about Bill Clinton. That is his character, that is his family life, and that is promiscuity. Having said that, and I think it will be a problem for him, the public discounted that once, or at least dealt with it once.
But Hillary Clinton went on national television and said, I'll stand by my man.
I think as long as he is president, they will continue to compartmentalize this piece. They don't like it. They don't want it to be in their face. They aren't enjoying this any more than anyone else is. But as long as he's president, they're going to give him the benefit of the doubt, I think. Now, when he comes up for re-election again, they'll probably take another look at it.
Reed, go ahead.
Well, you know, we've been talking about this, and nobody has really yet said here what actually happened, what the charge is. The question is all about motivation and what's the future. What is she actually charging? She is saying that a state trooper, at the orders of the president, took her up to the governor's room, and that there, behind closed doors, he made several sexual advances, culminating in him taking down his pants and his underwear, exposing himself, and telling her to kiss it. Now, when the people understand that this is what we're talking about, we find that they get pretty outraged. They didn't know that was the kind of man they were electing president of the United States.
So you think this is substantially different, Mr. Irvine, than having an affair with a willing participant?
There's no question. It's all the difference between night and day. I mean, the troopers have said that, you know, there were scores, over 100. One of them said he made over 100 arrangements of this kind for the president. But most of them accepted and were consensual. And this time he thought that he had somebody that was going to consent, and she turned out to be a different kind of girl. She said that she turned him down and said, I'm not that kind of girl, and she got out of there. And he said before she left, well, you're a smart girl, let's just keep this between you and me. Well, she was a smart girl, all right. She went down and she told her co-worker immediately what had happened. She told her best friend what had happened. She told her family what had happened. She told her boyfriend what had happened. And they're all willing to, I don't know about this older sister, but they're all going to say, yeah. And plus the fact you've got the evidence of the trooper who took her there.
Well, we'll watch and wait and see if this one ends up in court. Gentlemen, thanks very much for your comments tonight.
Paula Corbin Jones of Arkansas files suit against the president alleging sexual harassment. Does the complaint have merit, or is it part of a craven attempt by longtime enemies to get the president just as he was going up in the polls? What are the ramifications for this president and for the presidency? Could all this produce a backlash against the women's movement or help it? Today we'll ask Anita Hill, who came forward with sex harassment claims against then Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas in 1991. And what is the president's legal case? Can he be sued? Could such suits paralyze the government? Questions today for legal scholars Robert Bork and Professor Charles Ogletree of Harvard. And we'll talk about the political impact of all this with Joe Klein of Newsweek.
Face the Nation with Chief Washington Correspondent Bob Schieffer. And now from CBS News in Washington, Bob Schieffer.
And welcome again to the broadcast. One definition of news is something out of the ordinary, and last week something out of the ordinary happened. A lawsuit was filed against a sitting president in connection with an incident that allegedly happened before he took office. As far as anyone can find out, that has never happened before. And this president, who brought generational change to the White House, now finds himself a defendant in the kind of case that has been getting more and more attention in this decade of the 90s, sexual harassment. Clearly, this case has ramifications that go beyond this White House and this president. So we're going to look at it from several angles this morning. The suit was filed by Paula Jones of Arkansas, who claims that back in 1991, then Governor Bill Clinton made unwanted advances after calling her to a Little Rock hotel room.
He followed me over to the middle of the room, and he leaned up against a wingback chair. And he started telling me that he liked my curves, and he was using his hand motion, saying he liked the way my curves were and how my hair went down the back, the middle of my back.
Now, later, she claims that Mr. Clinton tried to go even further. Ms. Jones says she told friends about it at the time, but did not decide to file the suit until the incident was described this year in a story that appeared in a conservative publication. The president says flatly it did not happen, and he has hired one of Washington's highest profile lawyers to defend him, Robert Bennett. He says Ms. Jones has no case at all.
In a single term, this complaint is tabloid trash with a legal caption on it. If it was a serious lawsuit, it would not read like a made-for-TV lawsuit. The language in the lawsuit just underscores the fact that this is not about the serious subject of sex harassment or civil rights. Indeed, it cheapens and it trivializes those important areas of the law.
So that is the president's lawyer, Bob Bennett, and joining us now, CBS News White House correspondent Rita Braver. Rita, what has been the reaction over at the White House to all of this?
I would call it horrified resignation, Bob. They knew it was coming, but actually having it hit was very different. They were not prepared, I think, for some of the graphic details in the complaint. And there is also a sense at the White House, kind of a behind-the-scenes acknowledgement that this really wouldn't be such a problem if the president didn't already have something of a reputation as a womanizer.
Well, now, the fact that he hired Bob Bennett, one of the highest profile lawyers in Washington, this is a man who defended Caspar Weinberger. It's a man who is Dan Rostenkowski's lawyer. Indeed, his brother may run against the president, Bill Bennett, in the next coming presidential election. Why did he choose a high-profile lawyer? Because to me, that is a signal that indeed this might be taken very seriously by the White House.
Well, there was lots of toing and froing over that, but in the long run, the decision was made that they had to confront this head on. First of all, they wanted to get it out of the White House. They didn't want Dee Dee Myers at her daily briefings to have to stand up and deal with this day after day. They wanted the president to be able to keep his attention on matters of state. And in addition, they wanted the kind of aggressive defense that a Bob Bennett will provide. Remember that if they had just issued, say, a short statement about this, this would have been the kind of thing that took on its own life on radio talk shows, on television call-in programs. They wanted somebody out there day after day who is battling back.
All right. Thank you very much, Rita. We're going to take a break here, and when we come back, we'll get the comments of someone whose name has come up in all of this, Professor Anita Hill, when we come back. The Oklahoma University law professor Anita Hill. Professor Hill, thank you for joining us. We ask you here this morning because once this suit was filed, immediately comparisons were being made with your own experience during the confirmation hearings with Clarence Thomas. At that time, when you came forward, you were roundly denounced by some of the groups that are now providing a forum for Paula Jones. On the other hand, some of the people who championed your cause at that time have been very silent about this case. So we ask you here, first, I wanted to ask you just how do you feel about all of this? And do you see comparisons here? And what is your take on it at this point?
Well, necessarily when you talk about sexual harassment, yes, there are comparisons and there will be comparisons, but there's some real differences as well. And I think there's always a tendency to want to make something just like something else, and therefore we can deal with it in the same way. And what I would like for us to do is to look at each situation individually, and to look at this one as an individual case. And I can point out some of the factors that I think distinguish this situation from my own. One of the major factors is that I was called by members of the staff of the United States senators who are on the Judiciary Committee and asked about information that went to the character and fitness of an individual who was a nominee for the Supreme Court. I did not file a lawsuit. I did not bring a claim of sexual harassment. I provided information about an individual and how he comported himself in taking on his responsibilities as chair of the EEOC and as head of the Civil Rights Organization in the Department of Education. The process, the procedure for the information coming forward was quite different. Ms. Jones is now has now filed a federal lawsuit. She has and will be before a very different forum than the one that I was before. And so we must realize that these are going to be looked at differently because the procedures are different, because the forums are different, because the way they came before the public are different. I believe that they're going to be evaluated differently and certainly in a different place.
Well, do you see similarities, though, between your case and hers? You've pointed out some of the things that make it different. Are there any things here that are similar?
As I say, necessarily, when you start talking about sexual harassment, then yes, there will be some comparisons. There will be some similarities. I have to say as well that, yes, these are high-profile cases. And because they are high-profile cases, again, there will be some similarities. People will have their own opinions and perhaps base those opinions on faulty information or information that has not been checked. But fortunately, we have this case before a court of law, and the federal system is quite capable of dealing with the case.
Let me ask you this. What do you think the impact of this case is going to be on sexual harassment cases in general? Some people say it might produce a backlash.
Well, that is always a danger. And in fact, the suggestion was that my situation was going to produce a backlash. In fact, that was the prediction immediately following the hearings. But these cases can serve a purpose. Because they are high profile, they get people's attention, and people talk about them. One of the questions that is still frequently asked is, what is sexual harassment? And these cases provide examples of the kind of behavior that individuals find objectionable, and they give us a chance as a society to talk about the things that happen in the workplace. And that's going to be important. If we could take this case and bring it back home to our own examples, to our own experiences, and make those kinds of comparisons, that's, I think, one of the benefits of having these things in the news. On the other hand, though, can I just add,
Surely.
On the other hand, there's a problem with these cases because they create a sort of an unreal picture of reality. They almost even glamorize raising a sexual harassment complaint, because here we have people on television, a number of people are rushing to take sides on these issues. You've got an individual who is represented by a number of attorneys. In reality, what women are finding is that it's hard to get legal representation, it's hard to get legal advice, it's hard to really go forward with these cases, and there aren't necessarily a lot of people standing around waiting to support you and to hear your story.
Well, you know, during your situation, when you were called before the Judiciary Committee, some people said that you were being used by people who were simply trying to bring down Clarence Thomas. Do you think that that Ms. Jones is being used by people who want to bring down Bill Clinton?
You know, that would call for a good deal of speculation on my part and a lot of information that I just don't have. But one of the things that we have to realize is that when we have these kinds of cases come up and these kinds of claims, is that they raise really tough questions for society. And we have to face the possibility, and I say possibility, that in fact sometimes people who we admire and respect and we want to do well may engage in behavior that is objectionable and maybe even against the law. And that's a hard question for people to face. And so very often in those situations we will look for other alternatives or other motives for these claims. I don't know what is behind Ms. Jones' case, but I know it is in a forum in the federal court where it can get a fair hearing, and I believe a better hearing than mine got before the Judiciary Committee.
One other question. Why do you think that women's groups who rushed to your defense in many cases have been so slow to have anything at all to say about this case?
Again, I think that's going to call for me to speculate. I know that there are some groups that have spoken. I've been in touch with one. Marcia Greenberger at the National Women's Law Center has gone on the record and has stated her position in this situation. As I said, though, we all have to face very tough questions when these kinds of things happen. We have to look at these situations, and as a society, we have to decide, are we serious enough about these kinds of behavior to contemplate the fact that sometimes we're not going to like the outcome of the cases. At the same time, we have to look at what do we do when there are claims that are not justified. How do we deal with those claims? How do we distinguish between the claim that is a legitimate claim, the claim that is a claim that is based really on a misunderstanding of the law or the facts, and the claim that is contrived? We've got a long way to go with this issue, and people are still asking those questions, and I suppose that's one of the benefits of something like this, that people will continue to deal with the hard cases. This is a hard situation because it is complicated by the fact that we're talking about Mr. Clinton, the President of the United States, and the impact that it can have on the government and our image throughout the world.
All right. Professor Hill, I want to thank you very much for joining us this morning. When we come back, we're going to have a roundtable discussion on whether a president can actually be sued and what effect this may or may not have on the presidency. In a minute. Robert Bork, Professor Charles Ogletree of Harvard Law School, and Joe Klein of Newsweek, who is also a CBS News consultant. Gentlemen, let me start with this question first, and I should point out, Mr. Ogletree, Professor, you were Anita Hill's lawyer. Judge Bork, Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, and Anita Hill were all students of yours.
Well, I actually say that they were in the room, as to Bill and Hillary.
Let me ask the lawyers first. Does the woman have a case, Ms. Jones?
Well, there's no precedent about whether you can sue civilly a sitting president, but there's also no reason to say no. There's nothing in the Constitution or in the statute book that gives the president any kind of immunity from this kind of a lawsuit.
I think he can be sued. I think what's going to happen is that Bob Bennett's going to make a very good argument that the president should not be sued for something that happened before he was president, but now he's officially in office. Spiro Agnew was sued for conduct before he was in the White House. And I think Bill Clinton will be sued for conduct before he's in the White House. I think the real issue is not whether or not he can be sued, it's whether or not this suit will stick.
Does she have a legitimate lawsuit? You've both read the brief that was filed.
Oh, I think if the facts are as alleged, yes, she does have a legitimate lawsuit. Now, you have to recognize that a case like this puts enormous pressure upon the courts because the political implications are overwhelming on both sides. But I assume the courts will finally manage to rid themselves of thinking about that and decide the case on the merits.
Well, Joe Klein, you spend all your time looking at politics and thinking about politics. What do you think the political fallout for the president is on this?
Well, short term, I think it's pretty significant that even as this case was being brought, the president was successfully lobbying an assault weapons ban through the House. So short-term effect, maybe not that much. His problems are cumulative and long-term because this tends to reinforce doubts that the public has about his character, about the reckless and indiscriminate behavior of his private life. Does that also affect his public life? And I think that there's an even larger question, which is, are we entering an era, are we in an era of government by Geraldo? Have we created an atmosphere where no one with any interesting aspects of their past is going to want to get involved in politics? Are we going to look back on this time 100 years from now the way we look back on Salem?
Well, I want to go back to this kind of what you, in short term, all letters should be directed to Joe Klein on this, the government by Geraldo. I want to go back to that in just a minute, but the first thing I want to ask you is, let us suppose that this suit does go to court. It is accepted. What happens after that? Can the president be deposed? Will he have to give testimony? What happens after that?
If it's a normal federal court lawsuit, he'll be a witness. He'll be deposed. He'll be asked questions, not just about Paula Jones, but about other relevant circumstances by her lawyers, of whether this conduct is type that he's engaged in before. And what's interesting here, I think that unlike President Reagan, who we call the Teflon president, I think Bill Clinton's going to be considered the Velcro president. Because of his reputation before this happened, these things are going to stick. They're going to say Bill Clinton has been accused of womanizing before. Bill Clinton has the Jennifer Flowers incident. I think that there's going to be a little bit more credibility to this lawsuit, and it's likely to go further in the process than might otherwise occur with the sitting president.
Judge?
Well, that's right. And in fact, in order to show a pattern of behavior, I'm sure they're going to have Jennifer Flowers and all these other women who've been identified as having affairs with Clinton on the stand. So this could be quite a damaging trial for the president.
But there's a solution. Paula Jones has offered the Michael Jackson solution. That is that the president can apologize in some way, and she's not really asking for money for her own personal benefit. There's a sense of you acknowledge that you did something wrong and apologize, this can go away. I still think that before this case goes to trial, that these lawyers will find a way to resolve it. Bob Bennett's incredibly...
But can this president apologize for this, Joe, from a political point
I don't think he
view?
can. I think he's taken the only position politically that he can take, which is to deny it entirely. But as we said, there are a whole bunch of incidents where the president has said things that later proved to be not quite true with regard to marijuana, with regard to the draft, and this adds to that, and it creates an atmosphere that may hurt him in the long run.
Well, you bring up the Michael Jackson case. There's language.
There's another aspect of the Michael Jackson case in this, because she alleges physical identification.
Exactly, and that's just the point I want to bring up. Look, there is language in this lawsuit that I would not read on this broadcast.
That's
I just don't think it's appropriate.
But I think that's generated by the Senate Judiciary Committee. That's generated by the Senate Judiciary Committee. When Anita Hill made her claim, the people said, where are the facts, where are the details, where are the circumstances? So Paula Jones' lawyer said, we're going to put every relevant fact that we have out in the public now. Right. There's not going to be a trial by ambush. And so lawsuits to get any interest now, to get beyond the threshold, require victims of sexual harassment to say all the details.
That, Professor, and I mean, the point I'm trying to make is, we know what happened in the Michael Jackson lawsuit, where a person said that certain characteristics could be identified by photograph. He submitted to photographs. Are we going to have some situation here where a judge is going to order the president to be photographed?
It could well happen. It could well happen, because that's part of her proof, is that she knows something that nobody else knows because she saw him in a condition the public hasn't seen.
She alleges she saw him.
That's right. That's what she says.
I mean, this is a national.
Where are we here?
This is a
the
national
Western civilization. That's where we are.
That's right. This is a national craziness, and we're reaching the point where we're going to wind up with government by goody-goodies, government by people who have done nothing in their life except walk the straight and narrow, who have no creative thoughts. We're going to look back on this 100 years from now and say we drove some of our best people out of politics. In the 20th century, having an interesting sexual history is a leading indicator of success in the presidency. Just think about it. Franklin Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower had his moments.
Not the same kind of thing. And I disagree with that. I think these are kinds of things we ought to know. I think we ought to judge the person on this kind of character. This kind of compulsive sexual behavior is relevant, I think, to public performance.
It's a factor, but it's not dispositive. I think Bill Clinton will either have the curse or blessing of the John Kennedy factor. That is, people knew that Kennedy was involved in a lot of questionable activities, but he led the country in a very effective way. Well, the people knew, the press knew. The press knows a lot about Bill Clinton. The public now says, we know about this, it's probably true, it doesn't really matter. I think they've made a determination that Bill Clinton's going to pass health care, he's going to ban certain weapons. If he's going to get the country going in the right direction, they're going to forget what he did before he took office in January.
Well, the evidence is mixed. I mean, in the current Newsweek poll, about 60% of the people say that sex doesn't matter, but about 46% of the people say that Bill Clinton can't be trusted. And so I think that...
But those aren't necessarily enough to say that he shouldn't be president or won't be elected. He can't be trusted.
Of course it doesn't.
Right. We have about 30 seconds. I'm just going to let Judge Bork have
Well, I think, as a matter of fact, if the public doesn't care about character and about this kind of behavior, that suggests that something has happened to the public over time that is not very welcome.
All right.
Because I think it does matter.
All right, we're going to leave it there. This is something people are going to be talking about all of this coming week for sure, and they're going to be, I suspect, be talking about for quite some time to come. That is our broadcast for this week. Monica Gale is going to have the rest of the day's news tonight on the CBS Evening News. Thanks for watching. We'll be back right here next week on Face the Nation.
Moderate C. Gonzales Heights automatic sight wind southwest 6. Victoria Inner Harbor overcast 15.
Character and credibility. Here to talk about it, among other things, Republican commentator Maureen Reagan, Ellen Moran of the Chicago Tribune, and Eleanor Clift of Newsweek magazine. Very glad all three of you can be with us. Quick question, quick answer to start it off. First with Eleanor. Does Paula Jones' lawsuit really create deep political problems for Bill Clinton?
Oh, I think it's just one more of these allegations that detract from his character. I think initially the reaction of the American people is there they go again, meaning the press and the political establishment. But nonetheless, this takes its toll.
Ellen, real political damage?
Nope, I don't think it's real political damage. And I think to a certain extent it might actually be a plus because now we're going to forget about Whitewater and concentrate on Paula.
Maureen.
Oh, my, yes. It certainly does.
Well, we'll stay with the oh, my, yes. Why is that?
Well, the American people don't always rise up in anger when something happens that they don't like, but they remember it. And it's all beginning to build. The Whitewater, it's not the first allegation, certainly. And character is an issue, and I think that it's going to take its toll.
To Ellen, you say you don't think it's a huge problem for Clinton, but Howard Baker, who's got a pretty good barometer for Washington, does maintain, did in a quote in the press a couple of days ago, that this does undercut the president's moral authority, his stature. Do you see any substance there?
I don't think so much the moral authority issue is at hand here as it's just another distraction to give our attention, put our attention onto something away from his domestic policy. And I think Clinton obviously recognizes that. That's why he had a news conference on Sunday in the Rose Garden, just to get back in the news, to get focus on real issues, and to kind of keep our attention away from the so-called bimbo eruption.
To Eleanor, I think people on Capitol Hill have pretty sensitive noses and scent rather easily when people get wounded. While this in and of itself may not be a huge thing, does it make it harder for Bill Clinton to get those policy votes he wants on health care and on and on and on?
I think so far there's been an absolute disconnect between these allegations against the president and what he's accomplishing. In fact, he won a huge political victory last week on the assault weapons ban. I think work is proceeding on health care. Congress has got to deliver for other reasons than Bill Clinton's character or non-character, whatever. They've got to prove themselves with the American people. I'm with Bill Kristol, the Republican strategist, who says that if the Republicans think that they can create an agenda out of Bill Clinton's libido and Hillary Clinton's alleged greed, I think that they've, that they're really going to let a lot of policy things happen while they're not watching.
Do you agree with that, Maureen? Bill Kristol does, in effect, tell Republicans, counsels them, don't make too much of this zipper problem at the White House because it'll come back and haunt you.
Well, I don't think that anyone would think that you can make a national policy for a political party out of this kind of thing, but I do think it's going to take its toll on Capitol Hill, and the way it's going to take its toll is that members of Congress who are all running for election, the House of Representatives and a third of the Senate this year, are going to have to start to distance themselves from Mr. Clinton in many areas of this country, and by doing that, they're going to begin to take the credit, Republicans and Democrats, for things that are being accomplished where the White House had hoped that they were going to get the credit. And that's what's going to be the long-range problem for them when they go into a re-election cycle. And everybody looks around and says, well, what did he do? And, well, I did this and this. Well, no, you didn't. The members of Congress did it.
You know, the polls still show that the public wants this president to succeed, that they admire the energy and the focus he's bringing to the policy agenda. And I think ultimately he will be judged by what he accomplishes on a substantive end. And plus the fact, you know,
I want to interrupt you to
yet.
talk about poll numbers, Eleanor, because the most recent USA Today CNN Gallup numbers show that fewer than half the American public, 47%, think Mr. Clinton is trustworthy and honest. That's got to concern him at the White House, I would think.
Oh, I'm sure it does. And I think what it forces is a redoubling of efforts to prove themselves on the part of the agenda where he does very well, and that is handling the public trust. The same way he managed to win an election, I think he will ask for that same verdict on his presidency. What has he done in office, and how has he managed the public trust?
Let us not forget that this is the same candidate, Clinton, who overcame the allegations, the seemingly very credible allegations of Jennifer Flowers to become elected. So, you know, the public has already demonstrated that these so-called bimbo eruptions are not something that's going to stand in the way of
now, wasn't Jennifer,
didn't
Jennifer claim that she was sort of a willing participant, though? My understanding is, rightly or wrongly, truthfully or not, the young lady in Little Rock, Ms. Jones, says that she was the victim of sexual harassment. To Ellen, do you see any interesting contrast in the resounding silence of many women's groups on her claim versus Anita Hill?
Well, yeah, it is interesting.
Is that a loaded question or what?
Thanks very much, Mary. Yeah, it's a real problem, I think, for all of us who stood behind Anita Hill's allegations, but I think, you know, you have to be consistent here. Paula Jones deserves a hearing, just as Anita Hill did, and just as the accusers of Senator Bob Packwood did. Let's remember that Senator Bob Packwood was probably the most pro-woman Republican in the Senate, and yet women's groups got behind the women who were making their assertions against Packwood, and I think the same is expected here.
And it took a while for the women's groups to oppose Senator Packwood, because the reason initially was that his record mattered what he did on the floor of the Senate, not what he did elsewhere. But I think it's a very convenient thing to say to feminists, well, if you supported Anita Hill, you must therefore support Paula Jones. How about turning that argument on its head and saying to all of the conservatives who were in an absolute fury that Clarence Thomas's integrity could be questioned, shouldn't they then, by rational definition, be cheering on for President Clinton and be absolutely offended
I
at
think
what
you're absolutely
Paula
right, but
Jones
doesn't it indicate that it cuts both ways, that both conservatives are ready to rush to the defense of a conservative male accused of this, and liberals are ready to rush to the defense of a liberal guy accused of this?
Right. So, I mean, there's some ideology involved here, number one, and using scandal as a way to bring down political figures has now been used ever since, Richard Nixon, I suppose, was the, in part, Watergate. That is a legacy of Watergate. But it seems to me there are differences between Anita Hill and Paula Corbin Jones. And,
absolutely.
And it's
there
fair
was no
to point them out.
corroboration with Anita Hill, and there's a great deal of corroboration with this one. I think it is total hypocrisy on the part of women.
What corroboration, Maureen? The state troopers who were quoted in that American Spectator article said she was happily there.
Well,
which is supposedly why she's so upset.
I doubt that seriously. There is also there's a great deal of past behavior that goes with this that they couldn't find in the Clarence Thomas case. The fact is,
well, they didn't let those women testify before the Senate. That's one reason they didn't find any other women who said that. They didn't let them come and talk. Is that right?
No, I don't think that's right.
I think it's right.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. The fact of this particular case is that women's organizations who claim to have the moral high ground and who take this position that women always tell the truth, which is rather questionable whether we are any better at always telling the truth than men are.
That position. Who says it? Yeah.
Oh, well, Anita Hill has been speaking at conferences in which the title is Women Tell the Truth. But the fact is that it's hypocrisy to say that this is totally fallacious when every other charge that's brought against a Republican politician is not.
Fallacious, that's a sexual term, isn't it?
I don't think women are
joke.
saying this is totally fallacious. I think women's groups are saying she deserves her day in court. But let's not ignore the political surround. The fact that some of her family members are questioning her account. The fact that she initially came forward in front of a
well, it's not even questioning it. Her sister is quoted as saying that she said she smelled money no matter which way this went.
Right, and there's some shakiness to this legal suit. I mean, it may not even meet the threshold of being taken seriously. So, I mean, I think that all should be pointed out.
When we come back, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a policy decision. The president opens the door to Haitian refugees, at least a little.
Idea that sexual harassment should be taken seriously. What we are not doing is rising to the right wing's bait that says we have to take one side or the other.
It's harmful. It's sad. It's debilitating to the White House operations, to the Office of Presidency itself.
Live from Washington, Crossfire. On the left, Mike Kinsley. On the right, John Sununu. Tonight, role reversal. In the Crossfire, Kim Gandy, Executive Vice President of the National Organization for Women, and Janet Parshall, spokeswoman for Concerned Women for America.
Good evening. Welcome to Crossfire. Who are the biggest hypocrites in the Paula Jones affair? Is it liberals and feminists? 3 years ago, they rallied round Anita Hill when she made her charges of sexual harassment against Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas. Now they distance themselves from Paula Jones, who makes similar charges against President Clinton. Or is it conservatives? They were outraged and contemptuous when Anita Hill told her naughty stories about their man Clarence Thomas, but they gleefully support Paula Jones with her lurid tales about their nemesis Bill Clinton. Both sides say there are differences between Anita Hill and Paula Jones, but they disagree about what those differences are. Is anyone in Washington playing this one straight? Or are we all mired in hypocrisy and double standards? Present company accepted, of course, John.
You know, before we get started on the questions, I think we can all agree that harassment in the workplace is real, sexual harassment. It is abhorrent, and it ought to be dealt with quickly with all the strength of whatever legal tools are available to the woman who is harassed. So that's not the issue tonight. What is the issue is that it looks like now the National Organization for Women really does think that only conservative public figures ought to be charged and attacked publicly for doing this terrible thing to women in the workplace. It at least suggests a philosophical bias or perhaps even a partisan bias.
John, your nose is growing even as we speak.
Not at all.
As you well know, we have taken the most consistent position of any party that's involved in this. We have always taken the position that sexual harassment ought to be taken seriously and that women who make charges of sexual harassment ought to be listened to, but that both sides are entitled to a fair trial. As you know, in the Anita Hill case, we took no position until after both Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas had testified. We found her testimony credible.
Immediately after her statement, you came out with a position.
It was only after her testimony was completed. She was not involved in an ongoing court case that was going to have a judge and jury involved.
That was her first public statement, and within 24 hours, if I'm not mistaken, it might have been 48 hours, you came out with a statement supporting Anita Hill.
You are absolutely wrong about that. It was at least 2 months after her initial statement.
No. Her public statement at the hearings.
Oh, the televised
the testimony,
hearings.
right?
No, absolutely.
That's the first time she personally spoke publicly.
After the televised
The first time
hearings,
she spoke publicly, you immediately came out with a statement. Miss Jones has spoken publicly on this thing now. Why don't you come out with a statement?
one of the primary differences between this case and Anita Hill's case is that Anita Hill did not turn her charges into a media circus. The first time she ever spoke publicly was in an arena where there were prosecutors and defenders, where there were questions and answers, not in a conservative press conference that was entirely
what criteria did you apply then that you are now going to apply here?
The other kind of little revisionist history that's going on here is the story that Ms. Parshall started earlier today on Sonia Live, where she said that Anita Hill was a liberal feminist. Well, those of us who remember a little bit about what was going on there know that Anita Hill was a conservative law professor who served in the Reagan and Bush administrations, and that she was
followed the man she accused around from job to job.
She was a supporter of Robert Bork. Now, if that makes her a liberal feminist,
now, wasn't
that's a
Hold on. One of the criteria on the credibility of whether or not you will support or not support is to look at the actions of the woman that makes the statement. Anita Hill followed the man she accused from job to job. Miss Jones immediately rejected the advances and came out and told people. Isn't that a significant difference?
Anita Hill did not file a sexual harassment case. What Anita Hill did was provide information about the background of someone who was being nominated for one of the highest positions in the country.
And haven't you suggested that what she went through was the argument to make harassment the public visible issue it now is?
It did, in fact, make it a very visible issue. But the fact is, she did not have a sexual harassment trial. And if it had been a trial, there would have been a very
All the less reason to comment.
Janet, I remember conservatives, when Anita Hill made her charges, being absolutely furious. We had them night after night here on Crossfire saying, this is disgusting, this woman's a liar, this woman's a hussy, we don't believe her for a moment. She's tarring this public man unfairly, this whole thing is a circus. Now, with Paula Jones, conservatives were actually complaining that the media weren't giving it enough attention, should publish her charges more. Isn't there hypocrisy on your side of the argument, too?
Mike, there's a wonderful old saying in the world of music that says, timing is everything. Anita Hill brought forth her charges, and might I point out to you that the dramatic difference between Anita Hill and between Paula Jones is that Anita, who was a law professor and who knew what remedies were available to her, did not file a lawsuit. She knew that's what she could have done, and she really could have gotten some damage collection out of that, but she didn't do that.
Paula Jones also didn't file a lawsuit until the statute had already run on the charges.
But guess why she didn't? She didn't file a lawsuit. She filed a lawsuit only after American Spectator magazine took her name and said, okay, now we're going to run it through the mud a little bit. She said,
well, don't blame President Clinton for the American Spectator magazine.
But the point is, she did not decide to come out and do this the day before the election. Instead, she waited, pulled back, and decided, I'm not going to say anything, but it was only when her name got dragged out in the American Spectator.
But look,
give her credit for not trying to impact an election.
Janet, isn't there a double standard? I'll even concede to you there's a bit of a double standard on the liberal side, but isn't there also a double standard on the conservative side that you people are pushing this Paula Jones thing with a whole lot of relish and enjoying it and accusing the media of not pursuing it heavily enough, whereas in the Anita Hill case you were horrified by the very idea?
Dead wrong. We couldn't be more upset that the office of the presidency is being smeared and blemished by this kind of activity, because the reality is, Mike, who in America gets to rejoice and who wins when the office of the presidency gets dragged through the mud?
So are you saying that Paula Jones should be ashamed of herself, that she should never brought the charges?
No, what we're saying is that Paula Jones should be given her day in court. She should be given the right of due process, the rules of evidence, and heaven help her, she can find a jury and a judge who's going to be able to hear her in this country.
Let me try once more, and then I'll give up.
All right.
You honestly think that if these same charges had been brought against Ronald Reagan instead of Bill Clinton, you would be having the same attitude, that there is no inconsistency between your attitude and your colleague's attitude on the right in the Anita Hill case and this case?
Mike, what I hear you saying is that this is a decidedly political issue and is not, after all, a feminist issue, and that's the breakdown in the ethic. If there is a consistent ethic...
What's the answer to my question?
I'm answering your question. The consistent ethic here in the world of feminism is that sexual harassment is the bane of feminism. But what we're really hearing is only liberal women can accuse conservative men, but conservative women cannot accuse liberal men.
I just want an answer. I understand that you think that Kim is a hypocrite. I'm asking you if you
Never said that.
You think that Kim's people are hypocrites.
I never said that.
You said there's a double standard among
I said there's a breakdown in the ethic.
There's a double standard among feminists. would you say there's a double standard on your side at all, or you think that's a completely unfair suspicion?
I think what we have here is a problem with deciding whether or not sexual harassment is a real problem, even if it's between a prince and a pauper.
Michael, I am willing to say that it's a shame that this suit has been filed, because I think there's too much of taking public figures and running through the scandal. But what I do want to see is consistency on the part of people who have supported one side respond to support the other. What are the criteria you applied in the Anita Hill case that you are now applying to the Miss Jones case?
The very same criteria that we have applied across the board when it came to Bob Packwood, who, as you know, is a longtime supporter of women's rights. When women came out and established, and it was not contradicted by him even, that he had committed vile sexual misconduct.
We're talking about, let's talk about these two.
Where was the right wing when Bob Packwood?
Let's talk about the Miss Jones case in comparison to the Anita Hill case.
When the women of Tailhook
You
were
really
being
don't want to talk about the Anita Hill case in comparison to the Miss Jones case.
I want to talk about all of them. I want to say, where was Operation Rescue? Where was Randall Terry? Where was Pat Robertson when the women of Tailhook were trying to get a hearing? When the Packwood women are still trying to... No, there were many, many women who came forward in Tailhook, and the Navy's own investigation found that dozens of women were assaulted during Tailhook, but there was not one single person punished, not even one. In the entire...
now you've had your introduction. Now let's go back to Miss Hill. Let's go back to Miss Hill and Miss Jones.
There has been no clamor from the right wing for justice for any of those women. No clamor for justice for
You really don't understand how bad this looks, that you're unwilling to make the comparison between Miss Jones and Miss Hill. You got yourself hoisted on your own petard when you went out with criteria on Professor Hill. And you came out within 48 hours of her public statement.
And you are making that up. Your nose is growing, Johnson. You know very well
She was before the congressional hearing, and within 48 hours you came out with a statement.
Absolutely, that she went to the committee with those charges. Those charges were published in the newspaper, and we took no position until we heard her charges.
From the moment she spoke, you have no criteria that separates this except philosophy. Except philosophy.
I think
the pure difference is that
you can't
you
just
had
keep
a
saying it and make it so by saying it. It simply is not true, and you know it. And you can't make it true by saying it.
Are you telling me that Judge Thomas is not a conservative public figure, and Bill Clinton is not a liberal public figure, and that's not the criteria?
A conservative public figure,
and Bob Packwood, leader of the Conservatives,
is a liberal public figure as well.
So the issue is party. That you went after those that went after Republicans, but not those that went after Democrats. I understand now.
I think the point that John doesn't quite grasp, that Kim is trying to make, if I may try my hand at it, is that now did not take a stand on the Anita Hill case until after there had been a public hearing in which she not only could make her statement, but she could be cross-examined, the closest thing that was ever going to happen in that case to a trial. Now is saying in this case, and Clarence Thomas had also, both sides had testified, both sides have been subject to questioning, and at that point now said this is all the evidence we're ever going to get, so we're going to take a stand. They're taking the same position in the Paula Jones case. They're saying let's wait, there'll be a trial, that both sides will make their statements, they'll be cross-examined, and then presumably if they wish to reach a conclusion they can. So why is that inconsistent?
Oh, Mike, surely you jest. You're practicing revisionist history. The reality was we were in the middle of a man who was about to be confirmed, and yes, it is not an oxymoron that one can be a conservative and a black, but he was the wrong ideological stripe for the feminist in this country. So in the midst of the hearings, they stepped forward, and the leaked information about Anita Hill comes out, and this debacle is created. Now, again, this law professor doesn't file a lawsuit. If she was really serious, she would have filed a sexual harassment suit.
Perhaps you didn't hear my question. My question is, John is accused now of not waiting long enough before reaching their conclusion leaping to a conclusion about Clarence Thomas.
Right.
Now's answer is, we waited until both sides had their say in a public hearing and both sides had been subject to questioning. That will happen when there is a trial. In this case, we are not being inconsistent. What's your answer to that?
You're being wholly inconsistent. First of all, here's where your analogy breaks down. There was no lawsuit filed with Anita Hill. Number two, there were not corroborations between other witnesses. There are. You're talking about timing, Mike. The ball game has already started on this one. The opening pitch has been thrown out. The lawsuit has been filed. And they can decide whether or not they're going to march up to Capitol Hill and decide whether Kelso gets 2 or 4 stars.
We'll be back in a second. When we return, we'll ask our guests how they think President Clinton should defend himself against the claims of Miss Jones.
have to face the possibility, and I say possibility, that in fact sometimes people who we admire and respect and we want to do well may engage in behavior that is objectionable and maybe even against the law.
I think the thing that intrigues me most is the way the women's groups look for a way to absolutely excoriate me and look for some way to attempt to exonerate the president. And I find that an intriguing double standard.
Welcome back to Crossfire. We're trying to sort out who is supporting whom and who should be supporting whom in the Paula Jones harassment case against President Clinton. Our guests are Kim Gandy, Executive Vice President for the National Organization for Women, which has been criticized for not supporting Ms. Jones, and Janet Parshall, spokeswoman for Concerned Women for America.
Janet, according to Trooper Ferguson, who Paula Jones said escorted her to Clinton's hotel room, his version of the story, which was in the American Spectator, is that she came out of the hotel room, more or less said they'd slept together, and said that she wanted to be Clinton's regular boyfriend. She denied that. In fact,
probably girlfriend.
Girlfriend, she was right. She wanted Clinton to, well, whatever.
That's a different story. That's a different story, exactly.
Yeah. The point is this. That was what led her to sue. Now, either Trooper Ferguson or Paula Corbin Jones is clearly lying. If you believe Paula Jones, doesn't that mean that Trooper Ferguson is a liar and all his other stories about Clinton screwing around are equally dubious?
Michael, welcome to the American jurisprudential system. That's where we get to find out exactly who's telling the truth. Call him as an adverse witness against Paula Jones.
No. I'm saying, doesn't this cause a problem for conservatives who are eager to believe all these stories about Bill Clinton? You can't simultaneously believe Paula Jones's story and believe Ferguson's stories, of which are manifold about all the other stuff he did.
Mike, I go back to what I said before. I don't think it's our job to do a lot of suppositioning about who's telling the truth and who's not. She's filed a lawsuit. Let the process begin. Let her go into court. Let her have the right to due process.
That.
No, indeed. In fact, the position that we've taken is that she's entitled to a fair hearing, as are all people who make these kinds of allegations, and that we will make take a position or make a decision after both sides have had the fair hearing that they're entitled to under our system. But the problem here is when you get political profiteers involved and they have an interest in accomplishing a variety of things, none of which are necessarily related to what's good for Paula Jones or for Bill Clinton or for the country, you risk two things happening. And I think both of those are things that this crowd would like to see happen. Number one, they'd like to bring down Bill Clinton. They'd like to do him damage. And number two, I think they would like to bring down the issue of sexual harassment. And what they are doing is, I think, going to have that effect, or may indeed have that effect. In other words, if they can set up a situation where sexual harassment comes to be viewed as something that one does to bring down one's enemies rather than to seek legitimate redress in the courts, then it brings the issue down, and it reduces the issue of sexual harassment
to a
political ping-pong ball.
I do have to address that. Number one, I think to take down a president on the basis of what he's done in the boudoir is a really crummy way to have a sitting president taken out of office. And first of all, Paula knows that. Paula knows that this crime is not enough to impeach this president of the United States, unlike Anita Hill, who could make sure that Clarence Thomas never got seated on the Supreme Court.
How do you know what Paula Jones knows and doesn't know?
Well, let's do a 101R basic law course. This is not an impeachable crime, so he cannot be taken out of the White House as a result of it.
Why did you say Paula knows? I don't understand.
Paula Jones would have to know the basic law, which is this is not an impeachable crime, number one. And number two, to take down the issue of sexual harassment, no, I go back to what I said before, and that is, as the largest women's organization in the country, and that's a newswomen's, it's not the National Organization for Women, it is Concerned Women for America. The reality is, it is not just a liberal woman's issue, it is a conservative woman's issue. And what we have here is a completely interesting paradox for the feminist, and that is a conservative woman filing against a liberal man.
Janet, you're not denying, Janet, that...
Where is Concerned Women for America around Senator Packwood? Why aren't you calling for hearings for Senator Packwood? Why didn't you try to get hearings and fair treatment for the women who were sexually harassed in the tailhook?
There was a full examination
scandal
of the issue of tailhook. That process was carried out, and we're asking for the same kind of process to be carried out with Paula
Let me go to the
Jones.
political side of this issue. It looks like the White House has the best people inside doing damage control. They've gone outside and brought the best outside people they can, Bennett and Cutler, to do damage control. You've both been involved in public spinning of issues. With all the talent you
meaning
have,
Janet
yes,
and myself?
Yes, with all the talent you have in public spinning of issues, how do you recommend to the president that he deal with the political problems that this case presents him?
Well, I haven't, we're not involved in advising the president, and I wouldn't begin to suggest how the president should handle the allegations. He so far has denied them, and I would suggest that he handle it with private counsel and proceed to handle the affairs of the country.
Simple advice? Tell the truth. And isn't it interesting that the president got himself a criminal lawyer for what is a civil action? I wonder why he did that. But the bottom line is, I counsel the man to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help him God.
Now you're being ridiculous and you're throwing around innuendos. Surely,
is he a civil attorney? Is Bob Bennett a civil attorney? He's a well-known criminal attorney, which means the underlying question here is criminal sexual assault.
What it means, don't be a jerk. What it means is if you're in big trouble, you're the president of the United States,
Michael,
you try to...
manners, Michael.
Hold on, boy, I'm annoyed now.
Thank you, John.
Listen. If you're the president of the United States and you're in this kind of hot water, you hire the best lawyer you can find.
What kind, Mike?
You hire the best lawyer you can find.
Right. But that just happens to be criminal in this case.
And that's right. Thank you, John. He hires the best lawyer he can find, and he deals with the...
And one of the things that you will find out is going to come back and cause you some grief on the conservative side. The conservatives have worked very hard, and conservative judges on the courts have done their best to try to prevent women with sex discrimination cases from
I gotta cut you off. Thanks a lot, Kim Gandy. Thank you, Janet Parshall. John and I will keep talking in just a moment.
In filing a suit against the president is right. My concern is not with the case itself, but really the hypocrisy of people like those from now who are failing to come and rally around her.
No one can accuse you of hypocrisy on this issue, at least, John. However, there is hypocrisy, certainly, on both sides of this issue. Many conservatives who had nothing but contempt for Anita Hill are leaping to believe Paula Jones. And you had Reed Irvine, who was on the show last week while you and I were both gone. He's been running ads, and he's been demanding that the Paula Jones case be publicized when he was furious
Michael,
at the time about Anita Hill.
That's not the issue I am talking about. What I am talking about is consistency on part of the groups that are out there. And I think that the conservatives that you are seeing are merely applying the standards that they saw applied to them against them in the past.
The inconsistency is exactly the same in both cases. From the left, I'm Mike Kinsley. Good night for Crossfire.
And consistently from the right, I'm John Sununu. Join us again tomorrow night for another edition of
President Clinton's attorney in a sexual harassment suit says he feels sorry for the woman making the accusations. In a radio interview, Robert Bennett said Paula Jones is being used by Mr. Clinton's political enemies.
This is really about the coming together of two separate interests. One is a motive of money, of getting recognition, a celebrity status, and on the other hand, there are certain well-known partisan enemies of the president who are jumping on board.
The suit is one of many things the president might say has diverted him from his real job. CNN's Bruce Morton reports he is not the first chief executive to make that complaint.
It is a presidential lament at least as old as Thomas Jefferson. My enemies, the press, they're out to get me. Bill Clinton has now joined in.
Well, I think I've been subject to more assault than any previous president, based on the evidence.
Hillary Rodham Clinton, interviewed in Vanity Fair. I personally do not believe that this level of paranoia, conspiracy-driven investigation is appropriate of anybody in public life, not just me. The president does have political enemies. Paula Jones's charges first surfaced at a conservative political meeting last February. He has personal enemies. Little Rock lawyer Cliff Jackson was with Jones at that meeting. But the worst ever?
Bruce, you and I have been around this town for a while. I cannot think of any president in the 8 or 9 that I've covered now who didn't think that he was getting a worse deal from the press and the political opposition than any of his predecessors. It goes with the territory.
Opponents savaged Franklin Roosevelt, called Harry Truman crooked, soft on communism. Richard Nixon had to resign the presidency to avoid impeachment. Ronald Reagan traded arms for hostages and took heavy criticism for it.
One of the longest threads through American history is vehement attacks on presidents and vehement presidential complaints about the attacks. It usually looks much worse to the incumbent than it really does to someone looking many years later through the history of presidential attacks.
My Lord, Nixon and Johnson and Carter took terrible abuse, and so did Reagan. And I don't think there's any different. And I can see why he's complaining. He'll feel better as polls get better.
It is hard to make the case that Clinton has taken the most criticism ever. Everyone gets some in Washington. If Mr. Clinton doubts that, he can always ask our newest best-selling author, Dan Quayle. Gene?
Bruce, is there any evidence at all that Mr. Clinton is somehow a special case when it comes to the attacks or the vehemence of the attacks?
Not the vehemence. I mean, remember the anti-war rallies for Lyndon Johnson, for instance. What is different about this from most recent presidents is that Reagan, Nixon, Johnson were all under fire for things they did as president. The Clintons are under fire, whether it be real estate or sexual behavior, for things that happened before they ever got to the White House. On the other hand, so was Grover Cleveland, who fathered an illegitimate child. So there's nothing really ever new in Washington, I guess.
And Jack Germond seemed to be counseling patience.
Well, I think these things are cyclical. You go up in the polls, you go down in the polls.
All right, Bruce, thanks very much. And that's all for this edition of Inside Politics. I'm Gene Randall. Thanks for watching.
Arkansas State employee Paula Jones accuses the president of sexual harassment and claims that one result was a negative impact on her career. Arkansas State records tell a different story. Here's ABC's Jim Wooten.
Paula Jones swears in her lengthy legal complaint that she was denied merit raises at her state job because she denied sexual favors to then Governor Clinton. But that's not true, according to records obtained by ABC News. Mrs. Jones, then Paula Corbin, began work at the Arkansas Industrial Development Commission in March of 1991 at $10,270 a year. In July, 2 months after she says she refused Mr. Clinton's sexual proposition, she received a cost of living increase and a job upgrade that raised her to $11,960. In March 1992, the first anniversary of her employment, she received a 2.5% merit raise to $12,259. And 4 months later, another cost of living increase to $12,817. Washington attorney Kellyanne Fitzpatrick, a specialist in sexual harassment suits, believes Mrs. Jones' salary records are significant.
If true, it affects the credibility of Paula Jones. That is, how believable is she as the plaintiff in her complaint, and then how believable is she as a witness on the stand?
The absence of a merit raise is at the heart of Mrs. Jones' lawsuit, an example of how she says she was punished because she rebuffed Mr. Clinton's sexual advances. This sheds no light at all on whether those advances were actually made, but it's a clear discrepancy between the facts and her version, and it's welcome news at the White House. Jim Wooten, ABC News, Washington.
Secondly, Anita Hill worked for the person she was accusing.
Paula Jones was very much of an employer-employee situation. The governor, obviously, is the highest office you can hold in the state. We also know that Clarence Thomas was never alleged to have touched Anita Hill. Paula Jones has made very clear the allegations that she was indeed touched by then-Governor Bill Clinton.
The politics of the Paula Jones case, no matter how messy, could have serious consequences for the president.
I'm not going to dignify this by commenting on it.
He started to put his hands and slide up my legs. I pushed him back. I got away.
Now that a lawsuit has been filed, the legal fight promises to be long, expensive, and embarrassing.
Once the motion for dismissal is turned down, and I expect it will be turned down, the attorneys for Paula Jones have a green light to start asking questions, relevant questions about the president's past. Some of that will go not to this case, but other possible liaisons that may have been arranged by bodyguards or liaisons that occurred on governmental property or in governmental vehicles. All of that is potentially relevant to establish a pattern.
That is why the president's lawyers, eager to get the lawsuit dismissed, have suggested Jones filed it in the hopes of gaining money or a job.
That this suit is about publicity, it's about talk shows, it's about money.
But how does a president of modest means pay for all that high-priced legal talent? Washington attorney Robert Bennett bills at more than $400 an hour, and the prospect of a legal defense fund for a sitting president raises sticky ethical issues.
We don't like people giving money to a president. we want to know who those people are. But if it's public knowledge who's giving money to the president, then he might feel beholden to them.
I think that the Democratic National Committee ought to pay it because it's not legal bills, it's political bills. This whole thing is driven all by politics. Plain and simple, pure ID, 100%.
No matter who pays, such a legal nightmare for the president could ultimately be a political win for his enemies. And for the White House, that is a genuine fear. The Paula Jones case could accomplish in the courts what Mr. Clinton's conservative detractors have failed to do in Congress, put his agenda on hold. This is Chris Bury for Nightline in Washington.
And when we come back, we'll be joined by presidential advisor Mandy Grunwald and by conservative political activist Babe Buchanan.
This is ABC.
Bill Clinton, when he was a candidate for the presidency, is now one of his top political and media advisors. She joins us from our New York bureau. Babe Buchanan was the manager of Brother Patrick Buchanan's presidential campaign and is now the head of a conservative education foundation. She joins us from our Washington bureau. Mandy, let me, if I may, begin with you. What I always enjoy about James Carville is he gets right to the point. Politics pure and simple, but I would say to you, why not? It was politics pure and simple when Clarence Thomas was sitting before the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Democrats, and the liberal Democrats in particular, were pushing it like gangbusters. Not because of the merits of the case, but because it made good politics to do it.
Let me add one more thing to the story. It's not just about politics, it's about cash. I think there's a fundamental difference here between Anita Hill and Paula Jones, and it's about money. Whether you believed Anita Hill or you didn't, she never offered to sell her silence for money. I think that's a very serious thing. Paula Jones' lawyers offered her silence in exchange for money, in exchange for a job for herself or her husband in California. She already had figured out how to divvy up the TV and the movie rights with her lawyer on exactly how much money they'd each make. Her own sister says that she smelled money in this. I think this is a story about a woman who's trying to shake down the President of the United States. I think this is a very different story.
That part of it, you, as a presidential advisor, don't need to worry about. What you do need to worry about is that you're political.
Well, I think that it's very clear what's going on here. I don't know what Ms. Jones' motives are other than the money, but she obviously has hooked up with every right-wing extremist in this country. And I don't know if she's being manipulated by them or who's working on who, but you obviously have a lot of Pat Roberts and Jerry Falwell, you named them all. They're all in this. They're all trying to destroy the president and stop his agenda. Yeah, that's something to reckon with, and they'd prefer to talk about Paula Jones than argue about the economy or health care or any of the substantive issues the president's trying to address.
Let me try the same line of questioning with you, Bay, and that is, isn't this simply a case of turnabout is fair play? We have arrived at a point in this country where we set out to win or destroy an opponent in any way that we can. And if bringing along someone like Paula Jones to make certain allegations is the way to do it, then we do it. Just as the case was, just as the Anita Hill Clarence Thomas case.
Ted, there's no question that in politics it's an extraordinarily brutal business. I've been in it 20 years, joined it just a week after Watergate, and ever since then we've had casualties and woundings across the battlefield with people attacking individuals on personal grounds. And it started with Nixon, I think. It went into Judge Bork and Judge Thomas. We had Senator Tower. We had a number of other ones, Bruce Hershenson just a couple of years ago out there in California. And it seems to me, if you look around, that the wounded and the casualties are predominantly Republicans. It's the Democrats that started this. They felt it was fair play, and that chicken got big and fat and is now coming home to roost in the Democratic camp. It's a terrible tragedy for America, and when Mandy says this is about money, I'm afraid it's not necessarily just about politics. It's about character, and that's the real problem that we face today, is the character of the President of the United States. Is character a legitimate issue when one votes in an election? I believe it is.
I guess the appropriate question to ask there, Bay, is if character was an appropriate question to raise, it was indeed raised during the campaign. Is it not an appropriate issue to set aside until the next campaign?
It is, Ted, What we're talking about here is an allegation, clearly just an allegation, but an allegation of lewd and indeed criminal behavior on the part of the President of the United States. The President is never above the law, as is anyone is not in this nation. And so we have to follow it through. We should turn it over to the courts. Let them decide which of these two individuals is telling the truth and which one is lying, and let the courts resolve it. But it is a terrible statement that we have allowed something like this, these kind of allegations to be allowed to run along here. And truly, the problem here is the President has a pattern of these kind of allegations hanging around his neck. If this was isolated, Ted, if it was somebody making this allegation against a Jimmy Carter, none of us would be here tonight talking about it.
Well, I've got to say, Ted, Rush Limbaugh is the one conservative who's been candid about this whole issue of character. He said on your own show a couple weeks ago that the reason that he and others were trying to attack the president's character was to stop health care reform. I thought that was the most refreshing thing anybody said, because instead of all these high horses, at least he told the truth. These people are trying to replay the election. They don't like the result, and they don't like
Mandy, let me ask you something. If you look just now, you saw again Judge Thomas. The allegation against him was nothing like this, and yet he came out there, he recognized the greatest asset he had was his reputation, and someone was trying to steal it. It was with real indignation and anger coming out of every pore as he stood there before that Senate and said, I can't believe this. Where is the President? I ask him, come out tomorrow and say, I am furious that someone would say this about me. It is categorically untrue, and I have asked one of the best attorneys in this country to make certain my reputation is protected. I don't see that. I see an attorney saying he didn't do it. I don't see the President. I don't see the indignation. Let him say it, and let us all put it to rest and let it be resolved in the courts and only in the courts.
I'll tell you what, Mandy, take a couple of minutes to come up with the...
I thank Bay for the media advice, though.
Well, save your indignation for a couple of minutes and we'll come back with it. We'll be back in just a moment. Equivalent of a tribal blood feud. There is a, I mean, here is Judge Thomas, who quite clearly was traumatized by those hearings, has barely said a word since he has sat on the Supreme Court, and now there seems to be a sense that the same kind of thing has to be done to Bill Clinton.
Well, I think this is part of a pattern, not just of these groups being concerned about this allegation, but all of these extremist groups who have been opposing this president since the day he got elected. I mean, look at who's involved here. We've got Jerry Falwell
we've done that, Mandy, and the point I'm trying to make here is, I guess I'm asking both of you, but I'm asking you first. How do you ever put a stop to this kind of thing? You did it to our guy, we're going to do it to your guy, and if they are successful, Lord knows what happens the next time down the road.
I would hope that right-thinking Republicans understand that this is the presidency we're talking about, and there's so many tremendous issues at stake for the country, so much that Republicans and Democrats could be doing together. We have a crime bill that I think is going to be passed in a bipartisan way in the next couple weeks, a health care bill that also should be passed in a bipartisan way, welfare reform. I would hope that there is a way that Republicans and Democrats can limit their differences to ideological ones, argue the merits of different issues, different approaches to health care reform, and get past this undermining of the presidency. I think this is a different case than the Thomas case, mostly, as I said, because of the money involved and the questions that raises to me about Ms. Jones' credibility, but also because this is after the fact. Where was this woman during the campaign in that exploratory process? Remember, Anita Hill was a Republican who came forward during the course of the hearings, when the question about whether Judge Thomas was suitable for the court was before the country. The question of whether Bill Clinton should be president has already been resolved by the American people.
Let me stop you on that one, Mandy, and ask for Bay's reaction here, because you made a number of interesting points. The money, on the one hand, and the fact of the matter that here we have a president whose business is all of our business, and it does make a difference. As important as as a Supreme Court justice is, a sitting president, to handicap him at a time like this handicaps all of us, doesn't it?
It does, Ted, and it's a real tragedy. There's no question about it. The president should be allowed to focus on an agenda. I would hope that the Republicans will focus on the issues, because we have to do our best to stop the health care plan he's trying to propose. I think we should have philosophical debates on these things. But I'll tell you what's happened here is these things have a life of their own. This is Paula Jones is not part of the conservative movement. I certainly have never met her. She's a young girl, a high school graduate, and then went on to some secretarial school, a working class woman.
She was certainly adopted by a number of very prominent conservatives.
And I think, I believe this is the reason for that. I think it was very legitimate when she came out, because her name was in a national publication that said she had agreed to be a girlfriend of the president. She was protecting her reputation. Prior to that, nobody had her name publicly known. She kept it quiet. The name comes out. She says, I'm going to protect my reputation. Then what happens? She's working class. She's not an Ivy League attorney who's a professor at a university, who has a lot of knowledge about the law and has all the help of the feminists across the country. She's a working class woman who knows no knowledge of the law, goes to a friend of hers who's a real estate attorney who also doesn't know what he's doing in this area and in any area of politics. They take one wrong turn after another. I'm the first to admit it. But if the feminists had been there and had said, listen, we put on seminars that state categorically, women tell the truth. If they had said she deserves her day in court, come, given her the kind of expertise she would have had, we wouldn't have needed the conservatives. We could have focused on the agenda. But they weren't doing that. They were going to let her hang out there to dry with Carvel and her buddies, calling them bimbos and trailer park queens and attacking the personalities of these individuals. That's why conservatives stepped in.
Let me get Mandy in on this point, because it's a legitimate point, Mandy. The feminists on this issue have been terribly quiet, and it's all well and good to say it's only allegations, nothing has been proven. It was only allegations when Anita Hill made them.
I think a lot of women are very troubled by what's happened with this charge, because we take sexual harassment very seriously, and to see it politicized like this and turned into a tabloid issue like this is very troubling. I think a lot of women's groups have been very hesitant because of the questions that I've raised here tonight about her story. However she came forward and however she hooked up with these right-wing groups, it was she who went for the money in this story. It was she who I think has undermined her own credibility by focusing on the TV rights and the tabloid and the trash for cash aspects of this. When you try to shake down the President of the United States, people are going to raise questions about your credibility, and I don't care whether you're a college professor or from a trailer park. That is a basic question you have to deal with.
Bay, you've got the last word. We've got 30 seconds.
Listen, she has stated categorically she will take no money whatsoever. If she receives any, she'll turn it over to charity. This woman is after her reputation.
Not in terms of the movie and book rights, she hasn't been.
Right. Oh, right. Well, Anita Hill has done well on that count as well, hasn't she?
All right. I thank both of you very much. Bay Buchanan, Mandy Grunwald, good of you to join us. I'll be back in just a moment. And that's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
If you wish a printed